Lewis Hamilton just revealed the one Mercedes advantage that Ferrari can see, chase, and still may not be able to fix. And the most dangerous part is not that the W17 is fast. It is how it becomes fast. Because Hamilton is not guessing from the outside. He spent 12 seasons inside Mercedes. He knows how they hide performance, how they build dominance, and how they turn tiny details into championship weapons. So when he says Ferrari is losing time even with overtake mode activated, that is not frustration. That is a warning. Mercedes is not simply beating Ferrari with more power. They are beating them with energy Ferrari cannot sustain, acceleration Ferrari cannot match, and a system built so deep into the car that even a mid-season upgrade may only fix the wrong problem. Australia gave the first clue. China exposed the pattern. Canada confirmed the damage. And even after Hamilton finally won for Ferrari in Barcelona, the same weakness was still sitting there, waiting for the next long straight. The question is no longer whether Ferrari can fight Mercedes. The question is whether Hamilton has already exposed the exact reason they may lose the championship before they can fix it. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why Hamilton's warning hit the paddock so hard, you have to look at where he is standing now. For more than a decade, Hamilton was part of the Mercedes machine. He was not just driving the car. He was living inside the way that team thinks. The meetings, the patterns, the upgrades, the quiet confidence when they know they have found something others have not. He saw how Mercedes built advantages that looked small from the outside, but became brutal once the race started. That is why this story is different. When a driver complains that another team is faster, it is easy to dismiss it. Maybe the car balance was wrong. Maybe the tires were outside the right window. Maybe the driver was protecting himself after a difficult session. Formula One is full of excuses that sound technical enough to survive a press conference. But Hamilton did not sound like he was making excuses. He sounded like a man recognizing a weapon. And that weapon appeared almost immediately. In Australia, Mercedes did not just win. They controlled the race in a way that made the rest of the field feel one step behind. The W17 looked calm where others looked busy. It accelerated cleanly. It held speed. It made the straights look longer for everyone chasing it. Ferrari, meanwhile, had a confusing problem. The car was not terrible. That is what made it so disturbing. If Ferrari had been slow everywhere, the answer would have been simple. Bad concept. Wrong direction. Start again. But Hamilton could feel something different. The car had grip. It had a strong base. Through the corners, Ferrari could show flashes of real pace. It could carry speed. It could respond to the driver. Then the car would straighten. And Mercedes would begin to vanish. That kind of weakness is painful because it gives a driver hope before it takes it away. You fight through the corner, you nail the exit, you believe you have done enough, and then the rival ahead still pulls away down the straight as if your best moment meant nothing. That is where Hamilton's first clue appeared. He did not simply say Ferrari needed more power. He questioned whether the problem was connected to battery performance. That detail matters, because under the 2026 rules, raw engine power is only part of the story. The cars now depend on how well they use electrical energy, and how perfectly that energy works with the moving aero system. Think of it like two phones with the same signal. One drains its battery quickly when the screen gets bright. The other keeps working at full strength for longer. At first, they look similar. But when the pressure builds, one begins to fade. The other stays alive. That is what Hamilton seemed to be feeling from the cockpit. Ferrari could fight in the corners, but once the straight arrived, Mercedes had something extra. Not just for 1 second. Not just at the start of acceleration. The W17 kept delivering when Ferrari began to lose the punch. And that is where the championship fear begins. Because a small loss on a straight is never just a small loss. It affects everything around it. If you cannot stay close on the straight, you cannot attack into the next braking zone. If you cannot attack, the driver ahead protects the tires more easily. If the driver ahead protects the tires, they control the strategy. And once they control the strategy, the race stops being a fight and becomes a slow escape. That is exactly the kind of advantage Mercedes built its greatest eras around. Not always loud. Not always obvious. But relentless. Hamilton knew that feeling from the other side. For years, he had been the driver watching rivals burn their tires trying to get close, only to lose the chance before the braking zone even arrived. Now, sitting in a Ferrari, he was experiencing the same pattern against him. And that is what makes the situation so uncomfortable. Hamilton's move to Ferrari was supposed to create a new chapter. A final great mission. The most successful driver of his generation joining the most famous team in Formula One, trying to bring red back to the top. It had romance. It had pressure. It had history. But Mercedes had arrived in the new era with a car that looked like it understood the rules before everyone else had finished asking the right questions. The 2026 reset was supposed to shake the order. New power units, active aero, different energy demands, a whole new puzzle. And when the rules change that much, teams usually enter the season with uncertainty. Some concepts work, some collapse. Some look quick in testing and disappear under real race pressure. Mercedes did not look uncertain. That was the first warning. The second warning was Hamilton's language. He was not throwing blame at Ferrari. He was not saying the car was hopeless. In fact, his words carried something more precise. Ferrari had something good underneath, but Mercedes had found performance in the phase that mattered most. The moment when the car exits the corner, opens itself up for the straight, and releases energy. That phase decides battles. That phase decides overtakes. That phase decides whether a driver feels powerful or trapped. And Hamilton was trapped behind a system he could understand, but not defeat. That is the emotional center of the whole story. He knows what Mercedes is doing. Ferrari knows where it is losing. The paddock can see the pattern. But seeing the wound does not mean you can heal it. Because if the problem is only horsepower, you chase horsepower. If the problem is only drag, you reduce drag. If the problem is only traction, you work on how the tires meet the road. But if the problem is all three connected together, then the fix becomes much harder. And the W17's advantage looked connected from the beginning. Mercedes seemed to get better drive out of the corners. Then it carried that speed onto the straight. Then its electrical energy kept pushing for longer. By the time the Ferrari reached the end of the straight, the Mercedes had not just gained distance. It had protected itself from attack. That is why Hamilton's early comments mattered so much. He was not just describing a fast car. He was describing a car that made racing against it feel unfair in the exact places where a driver needs hope. And once China arrived, that suspicion became much harder to ignore. China was where the story stopped feeling like a bad opening weekend and started looking like a pattern. Because one race can lie. One race can be shaped by temperature, track surface, tire behavior, safety cars, setup mistakes, or one small choice made on Friday that damages the whole weekend. Formula One teams know this. They do not panic from one clue. They wait for the second one. And in China, the second clue arrived. Hamilton qualified fourth for the sprint, close enough to feel that Ferrari was not lost, but far enough to understand that something important was still missing. The gap had reduced compared to Australia, and that mattered. It gave Ferrari something to hold on to. It suggested that the car could respond. It suggested that the engineers were moving in the right direction. But the way Mercedes found its time had not changed. That was the warning. Hamilton looked at the W17 and pointed directly at the phase where Mercedes seemed to explode forward. He said that when they opened up the energy store management, they took a huge step. He said they appeared to have more deployment, and less drop-off at the end of the straights. That sentence was not emotional. It was surgical. And it changed the whole meaning of the Mercedes advantage. Because Hamilton was not saying Mercedes simply had a stronger engine. He was saying the advantage appeared when the car changed state. When the aero opened. When the electrical energy was released. When the straight became the place where every other team started to fade. That is much more frightening. A stronger engine is visible on the timing sheet. A smarter energy system hides inside the shape of the lap. It does not always scream. It waits for the exact moment when the other car is most vulnerable, then it stretches the gap just enough to kill the attack before it can begin. Think of it like two people running with backpacks. At the start, they look even. Same speed, same direction, same effort. But one backpack is packed perfectly, balanced across the shoulders. The other is slightly wrong. Not heavy enough to stop the runner immediately, just awkward enough to drain them over distance. At first, the difference is small. Then the road gets longer. Then the weakness becomes obvious. That is what Ferrari was facing. Their car could live with Mercedes in parts of the lap. It could show promise. It could create hope. But when the W17 opened itself up and released energy, Ferrari did not have the same sustained punch. And this matters because modern Formula One is not only about how much power you have. It is about when the power arrives, how long it lasts, and whether the car can turn that power into speed without wasting it. If the electrical energy drops too early, the driver feels it. The car stops pulling with the same force. The straight becomes painful. The rival ahead gets smaller. The rival behind gets larger. And the next braking zone becomes less of an opportunity and more of a reminder. Hamilton called it drop-off at the end of the straight. That may sound small. It is not. The end of the straight is where racing happens. That is where drivers launch attacks. That is where defensive moves become desperate. That is where a car with just a little more energy can protect position, escape pressure, or force the car behind to overuse its tires. So when Mercedes had less drop-off, they were not just gaining speed. They were gaining control. And control is the most valuable currency in a championship. This is where the W17 became more than a fast car. It became a race management weapon. A car that could defend without looking defensive. A car that could attack without needing to overwork the tires. A car that could make rivals spend everything just to get close, then punish them when they arrived. Hamilton understood that immediately. Because he had lived in cars like that before. He knew the feeling of having performance in reserve. He knew what it did to opponents. They start taking risks earlier. They ask more from the tires. They change strategy too soon. They start hoping for safety cars instead of building their own race. That is when a technical advantage becomes psychological. Ferrari was not only chasing lap time. Ferrari was chasing confidence. And the harder part was that Hamilton's words gave every rival the same problem to study. Mercedes were strongest in the overlap between active aero and energy deployment. The open wing reduced drag. The energy system supplied power. The car stayed alive deeper into the straight. Simple to say, brutal to fix. Because the new 2026 cars are built around compromise. If you chase straight-line speed, you can hurt corner grip. If you chase corner grip, you can create drag. If you release too much energy too early, you fade later. If you save energy too long, you lose the chance to attack when it matters. Mercedes seemed to have balanced that compromise better than anyone. That was the hidden damage China revealed. Ferrari could reduce the gap from Australia, but it could not change the identity of the gap. The missing time was still living in the same places. The same phase. The same stretch of road where Hamilton needed his Ferrari to keep breathing, and the Mercedes kept running away. And then, as the paddock tried to understand the energy advantage, another story suddenly pulled everyone's eyes toward the front of the car.